Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And now, on with our story time. Tales of Troy, the boyhood and parents of Odysseus. Long ago, in a little island called Ithaca, on the west coast of Greece, there lived a king named Laertes. His kingdom was small and mountainous. People used to say that Ithaca lay like a shield upon the sea, which sounds as if it were a flat country. But in those times, shields were very large and rose at the middle into two peaks with a hollow between them, so that Ithaca, seen far off in the sea, with her two chief mountain peaks and a cloven valley between them, looked exactly like a shield. The country was so rough that men kept no horses, for, at that time, people drove, standing up in little light chariots with two horses, which they never rode, and there were no cavalry in battle. Men fought from chariots. When Odysseus, the son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, grew up, he never fought from a chariot, for he had none, but he fought on foot. If there were no horses in Ithaca, there were plenty of cattle. The father of Odysseus had flocks of sheep, and herds of swine, and wild goats, deer, and hares lived in the hills and in the plains. The sea was full of fish of many sorts, which men caught with nets and with rod and line and hook. Thus Ithaca was a good island to live in. The summer was long, and there was hardly any winter, only a few cold weeks. And then the swallows came back, and the plains were like a garden, all covered with wild flowers, violets, lilies, narcissus, and roses. With the blue sky and the blue sea, the island was beautiful. White temples stood on the shores, and the nymphs, a sort of fairy, had their little shrines built of stone, with wild rose bushes hanging over them. Other islands lay within sight, crowned with mountains, stretching away, one behind the other, into the sunset. Odysseus, in the course of his life, saw many rich countries and great cities of men, but wherever he was, his heart was always in the little isle of Ithaca, where he had learned how to row, and how to sail a boat, and how to shoot with a bow and arrow, and to hunt boars and stags, and manage his hounds. The mother of Odysseus was called Anticlea. She was the daughter of King Autolycus, who lived near Parnassus, a mountain on the mainland. This king, Autolycus, was the most cunning of men. He was a master thief, and could steal a man's pillow from under his head. But he does not seem to have been thought worse of for this. The Greeks had a god of thieves named Hermes, whom Autolycus worshipped, and people thought more good of his cunning tricks than harm of his dishonesty. Perhaps these tricks of his were only practiced for amusement. However that may be, Odysseus became as artful as his grandfather. He was both the bravest and the most cunning of men. But Odysseus never stole things, except once, as we shall hear, from an enemy in the time of war. He showed his cunning in stratagems of war, and in many strange escapes from giants and man-eaters. Soon after Odysseus was born, his grandfather came to see his mother and father in Ithaca. He was sitting at supper when the nurse of Odysseus brought in the baby and set him on the knees of Autolycus, saying, "Find a name for your grandson, for he is a child of many prayers." "I am very angry with many men and women in this world," said Autolycus. "So let the child's name be a man of wrath," which in Greek was Ulysses. So the child was called Ulysses by his own people. But the name was changed into Odysseus, and we shall call him Odysseus. We do not know much about Odysseus when he was a little boy, except that he used to run about the garden with his father, asking questions and begging that he might have fruit trees for his very own. He was a great pet, for his parents had no other sons, so his father gave him 13 pear trees and 40 fig trees, and promised him 50 rows of vines, all covered with grapes. He could eat these whenever he liked, without asking leave of the gardener. He was never tempted to steal fruit, like his grandfather. When Autolycus gave Odysseus his name, he said that he must come to stay with him when he was a big boy, and he would get splendid presents. Odysseus was told about this, and when he was a tall lad, he crossed the sea and drove in his chariot to the old man's house on Mount Parnassus. Everybody welcomed him, and the next day, his uncles and cousins and he went out to hunt a fierce wild boar early in the morning. Probably Odysseus took his own dog named Argos, the best of hounds, of which we shall hear again long afterwards, for the dog lived to be very old. Soon the hounds came on the scent of a wild boar, and after them the men went, with spears in their hands, and Odysseus ran foremost, for he was already the swiftest runner in Greece. He came upon a great boar lying in a tangled thicket of boughs and bracken, a dark place where the sun never shone, nor could the rain pierce through. Then the noise of men's shouts and the barking of the dogs awakened the boar, and up he sprang. He bristled all over his back, with fire shining from his eyes. In rushed Odysseus, first of all, with his spear raised to strike. But the boar was too quick for him, and ran in, and drove his sharp tusk sideways, ripping up the thigh of Odysseus. But the boar's tusk missed the bone, and Odysseus sent his sharp spear into the beast's right shoulder, and the spear went clean through, and the boar fell dead with a loud cry. The uncles of Odysseus bound up his wound carefully, and sang a magical song over it, as the French soldiers wanted to do of Joan of Arc when the arrow pierced her shoulder at the siege of Orleans. Then the blood ceased to flow, and soon Odysseus was quite healed of his wound. They thought that he would be a good warrior, and gave him splendid presents, and when he went home again, he told all that had happened to his father and mother and his nurse, Euryclea. But there was always a long white mark or scar above his left knee, and about that scar we shall hear again many years afterwards. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. As always, have very sweet and creepy dreams. Good night.